I can keep this brief. I tend to, in my campaigns, draw my maps on graph paper and then translate them to the battle map when it's actually come time to play. A lot of my maps are complex enough that they can be hard to render with just simple dungeon tiles or any other prefab utility. But the tips I use typically when drawing my maps or creating them is to give, first of all, you don't have to be able to draw a straight line to draw a good map. I tend to make my walls kind of distressed and rough, even if it's a smoothly wrought structure like a castle. I will actually let my hand wobble a little bit along the line so that none of the lines are perfectly straight. What that does, it gives me an out. It sort of allows for not only does the place look like it's being lived in and whatnot, but it means I don't have to create these absolutely perfect straight lines on the battle map. I also like to add distress elements, cracks in walls, a little bit of rubble on the floor. Anything you can throw at the party which they kind of have to navigate around is always a good thing. Just features to basically fill out an otherwise featureless room. And so I'll often draw little rubble piles around to add to the distress. Other map features that I tend to do is I tend to avoid a lot of big curves or oddly shaped rooms because ultimately they're just a pain to draw and they don't tend to add much to the tactical efficacy of the encounter. And I often encourage designers to stay away from weird 7-sided chambers and other wacky things that DMs just can't replicate effectively on the table. The shape of the room does not a good encounter make most of the time, but making the rooms and spaces large enough for encounters to take place, at least particularly with 3rd and 4th edition, is very important. You want your characters to be able to move around. You want your monsters to be able to move around. You want to be able to push things around. I also try to, even on a flat map, come up with ways to add 3-dimensional aspects to the encounter. Either features that I can draw on the map that characters could theoretically climb on top of, like ledges and whatnot, or indicating with dotted lines or something overhead balconies that creatures or characters could hang from, jump off of, or whatever. And of course, on a battle map, it's a little bit crude. Often if I have more time, I might draw 2 maps side by side, one showing the upper level, one showing the lower level, and just have figures move back and forth between the two. But often a dotted line to indicate a balcony overhead is usually enough. We just put characters on top of dice or stands to indicate if they're on the higher level or lower level. But 3-dimensional aspects to whatever dungeon you're creating often just make the place feel more real and more entertaining.
Plus, it's always fun to push villains off, or the DM has a fun time pushing players off.
All right, so that's pretty much the end of me talking about the location. So what I want to do is come up with a good single central location that's going to be the focus of the adventure that we're going to be designing. Now, keeping in mind that we have a villain who is a former adventurer that has been excommunicated by his church. First, let's come up with a location just in general, and then we'll figure out what sort of makes it unique and interesting. So, yes, sir. Okay, so basically a church in the middle of a desolated area. Okay.
That's an interesting choice because the location is sort of reflective of what's happening in his personality and his life. There's an irony there that he's taken over this church that may or may not belong to the same cult or the same organization that excommunicated him.
Yeah, the suggestion, if you guys couldn't hear it, is basically that the thing that was feeding this valley and keeping it verdant was the relic that the hero used in order to preserve and save his loved one and sort of set him down this path of villainy. Yes, sir.
One thing about deserts that's neat is you have a lot more plants, natural plants that are just out there trying to kill you. And so
You like Dark Sun, don't you? You do? Oh,
But I've been
I
to
do.
the Chihuahuan Desert and, know that if you just trip, you might break a major injury. So as you've got the progression of this adventure, you can have more of that kind of vegetation taking over and creating movement barriers, creating problems that characters are not prone.
Right. Basically,
Progress of this going on.
right. That's actually a really great example of how the location itself can be an antagonist in many ways, right? The location itself is memorable because it's out to get you. I mean, granted, deserts don't necessarily have a will of their own, unless you're playing Dark Sun. But the adventure location will be memorable because it'll feel like your players are actually working against the place where they're adventuring. I believe actually I saw your hand first, so.
I like the idea of this church being the first location, but he needs to continuously do this at other religious locations, and he's running out of isolated places, so now he's threatening possible temples and cities and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In order to sustain this loved one that he's trying to keep alive, he's got to use the relic in other holy places.
Right. So the suggestion is basically that this might be the first of many or the most recent of many similar locations that he was forced to do the same thing to. Yes, sir. You right there in the green shirt.
Perhaps this initial location was once occupied by the church that he's now developing this. And their new temple that they've since abandoned this or whatever, in a new temple now that was built in part on tithing that he did to the church during his time. So he's actually made his, kind of indirectly made his new home or wherever he's doing these things.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how this could make the villain be sort of the unexpected villain, in that this is someone who oh, he's a contributor to the church and he's an adventurer who didn't just take all of his money and blow it on ale at the tavern, right, or magic items or whatever. He actually spent the time to build up these holy shrines, right? And when your players first find out about that, it'll make that character seem like, oh, this is a good guy, right? He's doing things that we're probably not good enough to do, right? Because let's be honest, your players are going to buy magic items and stuff like that. They're not gonna be that nice. So it makes the contrast with his villainy a little more stark, to see this person who seems good and actually does good things. And I mean, that. Like I say, I joke about it. But that is better than what the players are going to do, right? And so when it becomes time for them to be villainous, it makes that contrast more stark. I saw this gentleman's hand right in the black shirt, black, I guess it is. Yes, go ahead.
You also need environmental effects that as they travel closer to this guy's lair, if you will, because it's in the desert, then it can be very verdant directly around him.
Right.
As well, so you have that wonderful, reveal of wait, this isn't what we expected here.
Right.
And then indicate what you're going to find out.
Right, that's a great example of messing with the expectations of the location, and it's also going to be a way to make the location more memorable because church out in the middle of the desert, that's pretty memorable. Church out in the middle of a teeny tiny oasis in the middle of the desert, that's getting a little bit more memorable. I believe I saw your hand next, sir. Right. Yeah. Maybe it's something maybe it was something he found in a previous adventure. Right. Right. Yes, sir.
Especially if he's going to different locations and doing this, as this progresses around the region, you're going to have increasing tides of a lot of refugees.
Right.
Moving into, this is a great opportunity for secondary type of encounters.
Yes.
Problems that need to be solved that aren't fighting a villain, but fighting a problem.
Right. It's a good example of how the villain can seem to be proactive, even though he's not, actively saying, "Okay, you refugees, go to this town." The villain's actions have had an impact on these other people, and then when the players interact with those other people, it is an indirect interaction with the villain himself. So that's a really great example of how the location itself can feed into those indirect encounters. I believe I saw a hand over here. Yes.
I wonder, is the person that is being preserved by this action a personal loved one, or is it somebody who's somehow important to the location, like a rightful heir, or somebody who has some controversial view that is trying to do a good thing, or
Well, I'll ask you. What do you think it is?
I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing that out here.
What if it's the adventurer's former patron? The one who's actually sent him out before. He has a lot of, feelings for him
Right. So basically, the our hero is doing something for his former patron, and it actually reflects a lot of how players feel about their own patrons. Right. I mean, usually if you have a patron that's been good to you, you tend to return the favor. Right. So. Okay, so we're veering a little bit off of locations, but these are all really great ideas. I think we're really starting to put together something memorable here. So let's keep going. All right, the story and the agenda. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, guys. If you want to jump in, just wave your hand. But basically, the story of the adventure is going to develop. As your players take their actions, so you can't necessarily predict a whole lot about what's going to happen, but here's some good ways to make sure that your story is progressing in a way that seems logical to your players. First, make sure you have a very clear idea of what the villain's trying to accomplish. I think so far we've pretty well established that in our little adventure that we're putting together here, the villain is trying to sustain the life of, let's go with, a former patron. All of his actions and methods will tie back into that. So having that clear goal for the villain and keeping that in mind will actually inform how the story progresses. Yes, sir.
Actually, I kind of like the idea of keeping that a little bit hidden towards the end of the story, because a lot of players would assume that it's evil for evil's end. He's destroying all these places because he has an axe to grind against the church.
Sure.
And they get to the end and they're like, do I really want to whack this guy? He's actually trying to do the right thing. He's going about it the wrong way.
Right. So basically having the clear idea of what the villain is going to accomplish doesn't necessarily mean you have to reveal that to the players. It should, however, inform the way you design your encounters and the way the story progresses, so that when it comes time for that reveal near the end, the players can look back at the adventure and say, oh, okay, that's why all this stuff was happening. That's why the valley has changed. That's why there's these refugees, etc. Yes, sir. Okay.
I go back and forth as to whether to reveal things like that much earlier in the story, so as to give the players something to chew on. I have players who, once they realize that the villain has these complex moral things, will spend the next several sessions agonizing on what they're going to do next, and it makes it much more interesting to them in terms of trying to find out what the villain's trying to do, things like that. So, what's your advice in terms of when to sort of drop that into it?
So the question is, when do you reveal the information about the villain's motivations to the players?
I think that it's worthwhile to set up the initial reveal, so to keep it secret for a little bit. But after one or two encounters, I do think that knowledge that, oh wait, this guy is going down this road because he's trying to keep this person who, I think a loved one of some sort is more a powerful bond than something else, is to make, players, because players all have loved ones too, right? So they'll be able to start thinking about it. I set up this story where there was this artifact that basically the more players messed with it, it was actually a piece carved off a greater entity. The more people were messing with it, the more it was waking up this greater entity, right? So the good characters are like, well, we must destroy this artifact, of course. But unfortunately, the artifact sucked the soul of another main character into it, and one of the characters like, no, we can't destroy it because that'll destroy her. So he steals the artifact, and they're like, no, you're evil, you're gonna wake this entity. He's like, no, I'm gonna save this girl's life. So there's a tension. So the players the whole time realize the motivation of this other person. This is a novel, not an adventure, but it could work exactly as easily in an adventure for the villain. They realize why this person did it, but they know that for the greater good, they have to still try and track that guy down and steal it and destroy that artifact, even though it means the death of this loved person.